I want to put something on everybody's radar screen for which I think this audience, the POTUS audience, will thank me, and that is the debut tomorrow, February 1 on HBO Max, a one-man show called Rolling Along, starring my guest, Bill Bradley, who is having a hell of a life. I don't know which of these credentials I should mention first. Two-time NBA champion, former United States Senator, Olympic gold medalist, Rhodes Scholar, host, of course, of an award-winning weekly radio program right here on SiriusXM POTUS called American Voices, and now, as I say, the star of Rolling Along. Senator, thank you so much for being here. I have watched the film. I was given an advance of it. I thought it was extraordinary. I love the stories, the storytelling. I'm also really intrigued as to how it came to pass. You could have gone a book route. You've written several books, but clearly you wanted to perform this. How come?
Well, I'll tell you the story, Michael. I gave my political papers to Princeton, and they did an oral history. They interviewed 60 people who had interacted with me over my 22 years in politics. And so I invited all to a reception. 40 came. I stood up and told stories about each one of the 40. One of the people there was a guy named Manny Eisenberg, who produced 72 plays on Broadway, a friend of 50 years. He came up to me afterwards and he said, this reminds me a lot of Hal Holbrook doing Mark Twain. You ought to work something up. And I thought, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I spent the next year writing it. And then I took it on the road, went to 20 cities, Zach Theater in Austin, Texas, Marin in California, Chicago. I'd do it in theaters or law firms and have subscribers come. I'd read the thing to them. And then I'd say, what do you think? And they'd give me their reactions and I'd write down and then I'd make changes and so forth. And so I was going to do this on the stage, right? And then, of course, I asked people, well, do I have to memorize this? And they said, yeah, you got to memorize it. And so I walked around Central Park for months memorizing the show. And then COVID was over, but theaters still weren't opening. So I rented a theater in New York, had 5 cameras, 4 nights in a row, and did this film. And then over the next year, edited down to what you see today. That's how it happened.
It's not only Bill Bradley, but behind you, Spike Lee and Mike Tollin.
Yeah, well, one of the things about this, Michael, is that angels appeared along the way. The first one was Manny Eisenberg, right? He gave me the idea. And then I did it in one of those 20 cities at the commissary at the Warner Brothers lot in L.A. And a guy walked up named Michael Tollin and said, I think this could be a film. Oh, fantastic. Okay. And so I then memorized it, and I wanted to show it from my old buddy Spike Lee. And so I said, hey, Spike, I did this thing. He said, well, come on over to the office. Do it for me. And I said, just you? And he said, yeah. And he said, what do you need? And I said, how about a glass of water and a stool? So I went over and did it for him. And when I saw tears in his eyes at the end, I knew that I'd touched something. And so, when you get something down, you got to do it every day. Like playing basketball, you got to do the shot every day. You can't do it once a week. So every day at 3:30 in a rec room in the apartment building I live in New York, I would do the show. And it kind of got around. And sometimes 3 people would show, sometimes 8, sometimes 10, sometimes 1, sometimes nobody. I'd still do the show, 3:30 in the rec room. And one day, 2 people walked in, one of whom was a guy named Frank Oz, who'd heard about it. Frank, of course, did all the Muppets and did all of the Jim Henson movies. He heard it, and he said, I want to help you do this. And so he helped me take it the rest of the way with some notes on editing and some coaching on delivery. And so all these angels appeared along the way. And the final angel came down to, it was 2 weeks before it was going to be shown at Tribeca. And the film opened with a Van Morrison song, and the healing has begun, right? And 2 weeks before Tribeca, Van Morrison calls up his agent and says, Van doesn't give you permission to use the song. Oh, what am I going to do? So I called my buddy Steve Van Zandt of the E Street Band, who who I'd sent a version to 6 months earlier. And I said, Steve, I don't have the opening. I need some music. He said, well, Bruce did a song in the early 80s called Summer at Signal Hill. Maybe that would work. So I got the song, I played it, and it worked. And I thought, So I said, Steve, so I have your legal permission to use a song? He said, oh, no, Bruce and I sold our catalog to Sony 2 years ago. So I had to go through Sony with John Landau, Bruce's longtime friend and agent. He helped me get it, and that's how it happened. All these angels appeared along the way. And they each helped, from the people in these 20 cities that offered their opinions to Spike, to Mike Tolan, to Frank Oz, to Steve Van Zandt, to Dan Sullivan was another one. He was a guy, he's a great director, but he wouldn't return my call until COVID. And he's stuck in upstate New York. I'm stuck in New York. So we start talking on the phone. He makes his contribution. So all these people help me do this.
When people watch Rolling Along, streaming as of February 1, HBO Max, they're going to see Bill Bradley come out casually attired. You're obviously in front of a live audience, but it's all focused on you. And for the next 90 minutes, in a very personal way, you tell stories about the amazing life you are leading. If I'm not mistaken, Senator, very early on, I think you used the words that you were kind of summing up. You said you wanted to sum up. Tell me what was the mindset? Because, listen, you left a lot on the cutting room floor. There are a lot of stories you could have told. Why the ones that you did tell?
Well, I wanted to, it's kind of summing up. It's what I say. I wanted to, we live in a very divided time. And I realized that the Van Morrison song, I didn't care that much about the song, but the title was good. And the healing has begun. And I wanted this to have a healing effect on people when they see it, living in a divided political world that we're in, and see our common humanity. And in order to see and be credible, talking about common humanity, you have to be honest about yourself. So that means you have to be very open about your own life. And so that's what I tried to do, and that's my hope for the film, that it will actually help a little bit with people giving each other the benefit of the doubt.
I loved hearing
Just
about,
like you try to help people give the benefit of the doubt.
I try and give voice to all perspectives. That I certainly do. I loved hearing about life in Crystal City, Missouri. I love that your mother told you to ask to dance the girls who weren't being asked to dance.
Right.
I love that your dad was a banker once robbed, and a man who goes away for it wants your father to serve as a character witness for him, right, to get out of jail.
Right, exactly. That's one of the great stories I try to tell, which is a true story. I mean, the bank robber who had my father at gunpoint on the floor of a car for 18 miles until he told him to slow down and said, jump. And he jumped. He was apprehended 2 months later, went to jail. 9 years later, he asked my father, will you be a character witness so I can get out of jail, have a parole?
I promise I'm not going to give it away for free, but there are so many of the stories that resonated with me, really hung with me. You're in the Olympics. You're going to compete against the Russians, and you get a language lesson. You know where I'm going with this. Would you mind telling it?
No problem. So I'm on the U.S. Olympic team. It's 1964. I thought we'd end up playing the Soviet Union in the finals, and so I went because they had the second best basketball program in the world. And so I went to a Russian professor at Princeton. I said, "Can you give me a few words in Russian I could use in case we get into trouble out there in a game against the Soviets?" And he says, "What do you want to know in Russian?" And I said, "How about, hey, big fella, watch out." So he gives me the words in Russian. We get to the finals of the Olympic Games. We are playing the Soviet team. And my man is 6'7", 240. About 8 minutes into the game, he cracks me with an elbow up along my upper chest and lower neck, and I fall back. And I didn't remember what the professor said, so I gather myself up. I put on the meanest face possible. I look him right in the eyes. I say, "Bucha ostorosna," which liberally translated means, "Hey, big fella, watch out." Now, after that, the Soviets thought I understood Russian, and they stopped calling their plays in Russian. And we went on and won the gold medal.
Right. In other words, you believe they thought you were fluent.
Yeah. I believe they thought I might understand what they were saying.
There's a lot of discussion in a very positive way about race. You talk about your upbringing. You talk about your athletic experiences playing with players of color who couldn't even go to the same places of public accommodation as you. And race is also a theme. I have to tell you this, Senator. I'm a 76ers fan. I can't name more than 2 of the starters, and one of them is Joel Embiid. And yet, here I am at age 61, and I can rattle off Bradley, DeBusschere, Willis Reed, Earl the Pearl, Clyde, and I'm leaving out a couple. Why is that era so ingrained, and your team in particular, in so many of us?
Well, partly it's because of your age, Michael.
Okay, I guess you're right.
I think that it's also because it was we played the game the way it should be played. We were unselfish. We shared the ball, and the result was we won. And we won because we respected each other. For example, I mean, you look at the division in the country today, and I think the country could learn a lot from our Knick teams and what was our success, which is take responsibility for yourself, respect your fellow human being, disagree with them openly and honestly, enjoy their humanity, and what my grandmother always used to say, never look down on people you don't understand.
Senator,
and I think that's epitomized our team.
I'm very worried about the disconnect in the country, the disconnect in politics, but the disconnect in terms of a lack of common experience. It's a running theme of this program where I'm asking the audience, where can we go to commune, not in a religious sense necessarily, although there's nothing wrong with that, but as a society? When do we have common experience? And your one-man show, Rolling Along, was a reminder to me of how athletics can be that bridge builder. And you see race, you, Bill Bradley, through your teammates, whether it was as an adolescent or as an NBA superstar.
Oh, that's very true. I mean, I learned a lot more from my teammates than they learned from me. And I tell the story about Dick Barnett. You know, he was the Tennessee State team, all black, won the national championship, small college. And he flew back to Nashville, went directly from there to a lunch counter sit-in downtown where he had to have the discipline not to respond when white people spit on him for protesting a segregated restaurant. Or the African-American rookie from Mississippi who said he'd always vote because for 150 years nobody in his family was allowed to vote. Or the story about Cassie Russell, who was late one day for an off-day practice in Detroit, and he was fined. And 15 minutes into the game, into the practice, he gets into a fight with a white rookie, and Willis Reed steps in to break it up, African American, and Cassie snaps, "Uncle Tom," and Willis says, "Uncle Tom, well, Uncle Tom's going to kick some ass if you do that again." In other words, we were a team of people who stayed together, and that's common humanity is. What we have to understand as American. What I hope people will find is they will see a little of that. As a focus group once said about this film, it's about all of us. It's my story, but it's all of our stories. It's an American story. And that's what I hope people will come to see if they watch it. That's my hope anyway.
Before you were a United States Senator, you were in the Capitol. As a matter of fact, you were in the Capitol as an intern. You tell this story in the show. The night that the 1968 Civil Rights Act passed, it was also a defining moment for you in political identification. What am I making reference to?
Well, you're referring to, I was an intern. I was at Princeton. I was an intern in Washington in 1964. And I was in the chamber the night the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed. And when I saw Barry Goldwater, the Republican nominee for president that year, stand and vote against the Civil Rights Bill that desegregated those hotels and restaurants of my Missouri childhood, that night I became a Democrat, the bill sponsored by Lyndon Johnson. And that's how I went from being a Republican to be a Democrat. My father was Republican.
I began the conversation by rattling off just some of your credentials. NBA champion, United States Senator, Olympic gold medalist, Rhodes Scholar. I, of course, have to say SiriusXM radio host. That's arguably the most important.
Yes, you got to say that.
But in all candor, what are you most proud of as you look at the life you've led, the resume that you've assembled?
Well, I take the greatest pride in being a father. I mean, that's I talk about that a little bit in the show.
You do.
And that's the most important thing. What we leave behind are the lives of those we've loved and affected. And to me, being a father is the most important thing I've done in my life. All these other things are great. They express my personality, things like ambition or desire to serve or a desire to touch people about their own lives. But you asked me the question, the answer is being a father.
You were a Rhodes Scholar. You were at Oxford. The telephone rings. Billy Graham wants you to come. I think it was to the Earl's Court and participate in I'm not sure if revival is the proper word to use. And you participated, but you got off that train at some point. How come?
Well, I was in high school, I went to a Fellowship of Christian Athletes conference. I converted to evangelical Christianity. At Princeton, throughout that time, I was an evangelical. I went to Oxford. I was evangelical. I knew and respected Billy Graham. He asked me to speak at the Earl's Court before 5,000 people, give the testimony I'd given in a number of years, and so I did. And it was the last time. And I came to really understand, for me, that God's love was more important than God's judgment. And I always respect people, and I think that's really one of the key things, you know. I identify with people who express evangelical views as human beings because I don't agree with all their views, but I agree with them as human beings, just as I agree with some Republicans as human beings. And the key thing is we have to assert our common humanity. And I ask you, Michael, you know, when you were growing up, what did your parents teach you or your little league coach or whatever, right? If you lose, you congratulate your opponent, whether it's in sports or politics. You act out of honor, not grievance, right? You know that with humility and hard work that you can achieve excellence. And excellence is what you need to make your family have a better life. And it's what we need as a country to move us all forward. And so you look at the values that have moved us as a country. They're still there. They're still real. We just have to assert them.
That's a perfect note on which to end the conversation. I think people will love the film. It's called Rolling Along. Watch it. You'll understand where the title comes from. The star is Senator Bill Bradley. HBO Max is where you find it. Senator, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the movie, or I wouldn't say so.
Well, Michael, I know you wouldn't say so, and that's why I appreciate it so much, and I appreciate you and the job you do on your show.
Thank you. That's awfully nice. I'll see you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Senator Bill Bradley, ladies and gentlemen.